Hi, so in this video, I'm going to talk through Edexcel A Level History essay writing technique. And as it says here, this goes for paper 1, sections A and B, paper 2, section B, paper 3, sections B and C. So basically, if it's not a source question or an interpretations question, then this is the guidance, this is the structure I would follow. So the basic essay structure, and this is going to be the structure of this video I'm going to talk through. So we've got an introduction, aim for 3 internal paragraphs and a conclusion. Some essays you might be able to do 4 paragraphs. I don't think two paragraphs in an essay is enough. So 3 paragraphs is a good number for this. And the focus of the essay is analysis. So you're using evidence to support your analysis. You're not telling a story. It's not narrative. Okay. So intro, 3 paragraphs, conclusion. That's what you've got to aim for your essays. So on to the introduction. Introductions do 3 things. They need to do 3 things for A-level history essays. You need to give context. You need to give a definition, and you need to give your argument. So what do we mean by context? Context is showing the examiner that you understand the scope of the question. Okay, so it's very brief, 1 or 2 sentences where you're setting out what happened at the start, what's going on in the middle, what happens at the end. So for example, if the question is 1625 to 1642, you're saying Charles I came to the throne in 1625. There was a great deal of political instability, which culminated in the outbreak of the Civil War in 1642. That's it. So just really quick, you're not telling the whole story. It's just showing the examiner that you understand the scope of the question. Okay, so very brief. A good tip here is that for some papers and for some questions, there's some quite common dates that come up. So for example, here 1625 to 42, or for example, the course is 1625 to 88, the Stuart Britain course, civil rights 1859. So prior to an exam, you can actually practice context and get a really good sentence or a couple of sentences that you know that you can just go in and write if the dates are the kind of common dates that come up. But obviously be very mindful of the dates because the exam board might tweak it and change it slightly. Okay, the next thing is definition. So what do you need to do with that? This is really, really important, absolutely crucial to writing a good essay. You need to define key terms in the question. So if we're talking about political instability, what do we mean by that? If we're talking radical change, what do we mean by that? How are we going to assess those things? So in terms of exam board speak, those things become your criteria, or how you're assessing, okay, within your essay. So for example, if the essay is saying, how far was X the most significant cause of political instability, you would define political instability maybe as unpopularity of government or divisions between the monarch and parliament. And then you're weighing up the evidence on those things. So to what extent did money create those problems? To what extent did religion create unpopularity or divisions, for example? And I've got an example that we'll go through in just a minute to make this clearer. Also in the definition section of the intro, you can introduce the factors that you're going to talk about, the factors. So basically the headings for each paragraph. Finally, your argument. So what you need to do is you need to answer the question in your introduction and have a basis for your argument. So explain why. So sometimes people say, shouldn't I keep my argument to the end? And the answer is no, it's not a surprise. It shouldn't be a surprise. It should be something that runs throughout your essay. So in your introduction, put your argument in there. What do you think is the most important reason, for example, or just answering the question? And then it's very, very important that you have a basis for your argument. So say why. So for example, if you're saying the most important reason for the outbreak of the Civil War was Charles I's actions, you say that is because his decisions or his actions exacerbated other problems, or linking it to the criteria. So his actions meant that the government was less popular or further divided society, something like that. So here is an exemplar A star introduction. Okay, so the question is, to what extent did the failures of the English government in the years 1625 to 42 arise from a lack of money? So I'm going to read through this and then I'll show how I've broken this down. Charles I was crowned in 1625. Before the outbreak of the Civil War in 1642, there was a great deal of political unrest, including an 11-year rule perceived as tyranny by some historians. So that is the context. Very brief, showing the scope of the question, as I said. The failures of the government were characterized by the conflict between the Parliament and the King, as well as unpopularity, both of which led to an inability to resolve issues. So can you see how they've defined failures of the English government? That's the key term in the question. So that's the definition. Factors such as religion and the personality of the king, as well as money, were responsible for the failures of the English government. So that's setting out the factors. So they've defined the key terms, they've set out the factors. Last thing to do is the argument. Overall, the most important cause of failures was the king's personality, as many financial and religious causes were rooted in the decisions and the attitudes of the king. So you can see they've clearly context, definition, argument, and the argument has a clear basis. Okay, the most important cause of failures was the king's personality, as many financial and religious causes were rooted in the decisions and attitudes of the king. So it's not just saying overall it was the king. They've got a bit nice basis there. So that's a really top level answer. It's a real example from a student. Okay. So in your first paragraph, you need to start with the factor in the question. So in this question that we've just looked at, it's failures of English government 1625 to 42 arise from a lack of money. So paragraph 1 in this essay would be money. So always start with the one in the question. You need to do 4 things for your internal paragraphs. You need to give a point, evidence, judgment, and summary. I would aim for 3 pieces of evidence per paragraph, although some narrow questions you can maybe get away with 2 if it's a narrower question. If it's a very narrow scope, for example, you maybe don't have 3 pieces of evidence for every factor, and that's okay. If you've only got 2 for one paragraph, it might be okay. But what you've really got to do is make sure that you analyze every piece of evidence. So linking it back to the question, explaining how that piece of evidence helps to answer the question. So to go into this in a little bit more detail, what you need to do to begin with is set out what the paragraph is going to be about. What is the focus of the paragraph? So the topic sentence is sometimes called. Set out what the paragraph is going to be focused on and make it argumentative. Don't just say, one cause of failure of English government is money. Actually make it argumentative, and we'll look at an example in a minute. Next up, your evidence. So use a piece of precise evidence, concrete evidence, to illustrate your point. So it could be an event, an act, a person, not a vague, there were some issues which led to problems, not that. It's got to be something precise, an event with a date. The more precise, the better. You're not telling the story, but just to really illustrate that precisely what's going on here. Then onto the judgment, which you do after every piece of evidence. So you analyze the evidence, you link it to the question, and you can use your criteria from your definition. So if you said failures of government mean inability to resolve issues, show how that piece of evidence led to a failure to resolve issues. Okay, so linking back to the key terms in the question, basically. And then finally, at the end of the paragraph, you should summarize for that factor in relation to the question and the other factors. So kind of weighing it up. It's called prioritization. That's what you need to do to get to the top level. Okay, so here is an exemplar paragraph. And again, I'm going to color code this. So I am going to read through all of it because I think it's really important for you to see what this looks like. So this is the same question about the failures of English government 1625 to 42. So this is the first paragraph about money. Money was a significant factor in the failures of the English government between 1625 to 42, as it created tensions between Charles and Parliament, as well as causing a decline in Charles's popularity. So a really, really good point explaining not just what this paragraph is going to be on, but why money is important. An example of this is Parliament's decision to grant tonnage and poundage for life rather than for 1 year rather than life in 1625. This links to religion as it went against Charles's divine right as king. So making a link to other factors, which is, again, a top-level skill. Furthermore, it led to the failure of government as it meant that Charles was both hostile towards and dependent on Parliament, an oxymoron sure to cause future conflict. So really, really good analysis there, this antagonism between the king and Parliament. So we've got a really clear point. We've got clear, precise evidence, tonnage and poundage, 1625, making a link to another factor, and clear kind of judgment analysis there. Okay. Then we go on to the next piece of evidence. Another example occurred in 1635, where Charles extended ship money to inland regions and changed its collection from once or twice during a reign to annually. This is significant as it was an incredibly unpopular decision. It was a clear attempt to raise money without Parliament, making some believe Charles was in pursuit of an absolute monarchy. This example also relates to the king's personality, as it suggested his lack of awareness. A final example that shows the failures of government arose from a lack of money is the soap monopoly of 1634. Charles monopolized the soap industry in an attempt to raise funds. This links to religion, as it meant soap could only be bought from a single Catholic company. This is significant as England was a Protestant country and Charles's decision was therefore incredibly unpopular. Overall, a lack of money led to an increase in anger towards the king and tensions between Charles I and Parliament. And then we get to the summary. So this is the summary. We get into the prioritization now, I should say. However, this factor was responsible for the failures of government to a small extent only, as it was the religious or personal aspects of the above examples which evoked the reactions which ensured the government's downfall rather than the lack of money itself. So really, really clear paragraph. You can see just following that structure, point, evidence, judgment. It's got summaries there as well. Evidence, judgment, summary. Okay, and the summary is really clearly weighing up how important money is. Okay, so in terms of the next two paragraphs 2 and 3, follow the same structure as before. The key issue here with the second and third paragraph is making sure that you link back to the question. So don't have them as paragraphs that aren't really engaging with the key terms of the question. They aren't engaging with the factor in the question. Make sure they engage with the key terms and the factor in the question. Okay, so again, you're doing a point, you're doing evidence, judgment, summary. Okay, just the same as the first paragraph, but make sure, I think in the second and third paragraphs, the summary is very, very important that you link back to the question. Okay, it's really, really important that you do that. You link back to the question, link back to your overall argument. The easiest place to do that is in the summary. Okay, in terms of the conclusion, you need to do two things. Answer the question, and again, weigh up the relative importance of each factor and show how they link. Okay, so in terms of answering the question, you're reiterating your argument, the argument that should have been running throughout your essay. Some people say, isn't it repetitive? Yes, it is, and it should be. You've only got 45 minutes in the exam to write this, so it should be, reiterating it. You're not setting out something new here. You might be developing it further, but you're not setting out something new in the conclusion. It shouldn't be a surprise. It should be reiterating what's already been said. Weighing up the relative importance of each factor, you can start to develop those links, develop the overall argument of where they all sit. By the end of the essay, the examiner should be able to really see that, factor 1 is the most important, factor 2 is the second most, and factor 3 is the third most important, or however you've prioritized them. So here's an exemplar conclusion for the same question. To conclude, it is evident that the failures of the English government arose from a lack of money to a small extent only. So clear answer to the question. Whilst the extension of ship money and monopolies caused a great grief for government, those were ideas implemented by Charles, and therefore his personality is therefore to blame. The same can be said for religious issues, seeing as the decisions to marry Henrietta Maria and appoint Lord Archbishop were made by Charles. He should be blamed rather than religion. Consequently, not only are money and religion only partially responsible for government's failure, but Charles's personality should also be considered the most significant cause. So really weighing up the factors, a very clear line of argument. So just to summarize what I've said in this video overall, you could use this as a kind of model for your essays. Intro, you do context, definition, argument. You've got 3 paragraphs in which you do 4 things: point, evidence, judgment, summary at the end, where you link to the factor in the question, you link to your overall argument, and then in conclusion, answering the question, weighing up the importance of each factor. Just a final tip in terms of exam success: make sure that you plan your essays beforehand. Make sure that when you see the question, you're planning out what the key terms are in the question, what your paragraphs are going to be, the evidence you're going to use in your line of argument before you start writing. It should only take 5 minutes. Just quickly do that, and it will make a huge difference when you're writing the essay. Have a clear and consistent line of argument running throughout your essay. Make sure that you are reiterating that in every paragraph. And finally, this is something that's really important: make sure you're focusing on the precise wording of the question. So linking to key words in the question, if it's about significance or success or failure, whatever it's focusing on, link back to those precise words, almost those kind of buzzwords that the examiner is looking for. Do that throughout your essay. Okay, thank you for listening.